Hello. This is the first full week of May 2020. We're getting close to halfway through the year, aren't we? This past weekend we celebrated the 75 years of the end of World War II in Europe. In England they call it VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, and they had lots of really good documentaries and news broadcasts, movies, and then interviews with precious people sharing their precious memories from those times. And it just helped me a lot to get perspective on the things that they'd experienced. I also got to thinking of one of the quotes that we still see today that came from that era, called "keep calm and carry on." I think right now that's something we probably all need to adapt into our lives, isn't it? Just keep calm and carry on. We're going to be talking about contentment today. I keep trying to say commitment or confidence or something like that, but contentment is what we're going to talk about. And as I look back and think about my grandparents who were members of that greatest generation, I can see the contentment that was in their lives. And it was evidenced by the resolve that they had to maintain purpose and principle through hard times. And I think they'd learned that through all the difficulties they'd faced. And I think that's what really carried them through those times, of having a contentment that was based in a resolve of purpose and principle. They knew what they were fighting for, and that gave them that confidence that they needed. But we're talking about contentment, and so Philippians chapter 4 verse 1 reads, "I've learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." Now, I don't know about you. Can we really say that today? Those are the words of the Apostle Paul as he sat in the Philippian jail. He was isolated and restricted, if you'll let me use that again, isolated and restricted, but yet he says he was content. I don't know if that I would be the same if I was in his shoes. How about you? None of us really like being restricted, and I think we're just too independent. And we're in a restricted place, though, right now. So how are we doing? Are we content? Back in the 1600s, a British preacher named Jeremiah Burroughs wrote a book called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. And it is one of my rare jewels that sits on my bookshelf. And you can actually get it free as a PDF on the internet if you want to read it. But I do warn you, he doesn't cut us any slack when it comes to our obstinate, complaining hearts. He really talks straight about the intense definition of what contentment or biblical contentment really looks like. He shows the benefits of it, and there are demands that come with contentment. So today I want to share with you just a little taste of what he wrote, and we'll apply it and look at it as what we're facing today. So here's his definition of Christian contentment. Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. You want to hear that again? Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. Did you hear all those beautiful words? Sweetness, quietness, graciousness, submission, and delighting. And did you catch where it came from? It's a work of the Spirit, inwardly. It's a heart business. It's not merely holding your tongue when you're having a hard time. It's a calmness. It's on the inside while there's storms on the outside. It's assurance and trust in action. So let me ask you some questions. Does that mean that we would feel no apprehension, have no second thoughts, no recognition of the afflictions that we're facing? No, that's not what it means. We are still going to have feelings even in the middle of contentment, but they have to come in line with truth. Does it mean that we see no need to take our burden to the Lord, no need to pray or to seek the encouragement of others when we face trials? Nope, that's not what contentment means either. We are to bear our hearts and cast our burdens upon the Lord. He tells us to do that. And we're to confess our faults one to another and pray for one another that we might be healed when we're facing hard times. These are a source, and they are a way of increasing our contentment and the quietness of our heart. As we share our burdens with the Lord and with others, we grow. Does it mean that we don't do anything to release ourselves from affliction? Or do we just resign ourselves to fate? Well, it doesn't mean that either, because contentment does not mean complacency or resignation to our situation. It's an evidence of confidence, and it works toward pursuing peace. It has a purpose and a principle. So let's think just a minute about some of the things that show us or exhibit a lack of confidence. And of course, there I go, contentment. Of course, it's easy for us to do the first things, isn't it? A discontented heart complains, murmurs, frets, stews, carries on. Because out of the heart we speak, don't we? So what's in our heart is going to come out. So if we have a discontented heart, it's going to come out in our words. If we have an uncontrolled spirit, then it's going to run wild in the face of adversity. It's going to fight against the restrictions. It's not going to find peace because it's always going to be struggling. And you can also find that a discontented heart is distracted. It means that it just can't settle down on its duty, especially when it comes to its relationship with the Lord or others. It can't focus very long. It can't concentrate very long. It's always flitting about and shifting, and it's just not happy wherever it is because it's distracted. A discontented heart is also consumed with care, as Burroughs talks about. And he's not talking about worry. He's talking about having too many pans in the fire. A discontented heart thinks it has to have more and more things to do to distract itself, but lots of busyness. Burroughs has a very interesting little quote here, and it's very British for my American listeners, but it says, "A great man will permit common people to stand outside his doors." And that's talking about the difference in the social categories, a great person as opposed to a common person. So a great man will permit common people to stand outside his doors, but he will not let them come in and make a noise in his closet or his bedroom when he has deliberately retired from worldly business. In other words, a quiet heart knows how to order their life. It keeps work at work and home life protected. It lives with boundaries around it. But a discontented heart has no boundaries. It lets the common person, it lets distraction come into the home. And so that's the difference. A lack of contentment is also exhibited by sinking discouragements, Burroughs says. He says, so far as your heart sinks and you are discouraged under affliction, so much you need to learn the lesson of contentment. So how far down you go in pressures and these kind of things shows how much you lack contentment in your life. Then he mentions something called sinful shiftings and shirkings in order to get relief. So by this he means that the quiet, contented heart does not go outside of God's will to solve the problem. And he relates it back to when Saul went to the witch of Endor because he was trying to make things work the way he wanted, or when he sacrificed early before Samuel got there. He got in a hurry and tried to fix things himself. So the quiet heart relies on God and can wait. It doesn't have that attitude of relief at any cost. It rests in the Lord. And finally, the quiet, contented heart is not rebellious. It's not rebellious against the Lord. It's not rebellious against others. So here's the first thing for us to consider. Are we living with a quiet inward spirit? Do those qualities of sweetness and quietness, graciousness, submission, and delight ooze from our hearts and from our mouths? Are we inwardly torn and tumultuous and anxious and fearful? Are we sinking and growing discouraged under the affliction? These are signs of being discontent. So let's hear that definition again. Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. So it's a frame of the spirit, a frame of the soul that creates these beautiful qualities that we've mentioned. It's a grace that spreads throughout our whole soul, and it permeates every decision that we make, every response, and it guides us toward peace and assurance and confidence. I think that's why God says that godliness with contentment is great gain, because he knows that contentment is a very valuable quality for our lives. So contentment has what Burroughs calls a gracious frame. So let's think about what is a gracious frame. Well, a gracious frame is strong, it's solid, it's reliable, it's compassionate, and it readily responds to the call of God to service. It freely submits and takes pleasure in God's appointments. And when situations change, if we have a gracious frame, the heart is readily brought over. We don't have to struggle with the thing God's given us to do. We're free to move, and we're not constrained. We're also free to think, but yet not unwise. So a gracious frame brings our heart and our soul together under God's authority, and it takes pleasure in God's appointment, God's call, God's will. So like honey from the rock, it sweetly surrenders, looking to God in all things, in every condition. You remember what Paul wrote? I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. For Paul, his contentment was something he lived out, and he many times in Scripture tells people to look and see how he's living, look and see how he's acting, to follow his example. And then in Philippians he says, what things you have both learned and heard and received and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. So contentment settles us right down, and it helps us to do the next right thing. It knows that whatsoever state we are in, it is a holy appointment, a holy complication, a holy calling, and we rise to meet that calling, to share in his sufferings if that's what our appointment is, to become all things to all men that we might win some. So this is how our life is framed, because contentment is submissive. You know, we aren't God. We cannot go around carving to our own delights or our own design. When we do that, when we try to do that, we actually mar the image of Christ in our lives. He is the master craftsman, and we're to yield to him no matter what the number or variety of afflictions that we face. Afflictions change us, don't they? They make a mark in our life, and you know they're supposed to. God says he uses the furnace of affliction to purify us, and we don't need to fear that. We really need to yield to that. So one of the most precious words I find in this definition that Burroughs has is the word fatherly. Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. Do you know that song, You're a Good, Good Father, that's who you are, and I'm loved by you, that's who I am? It's a precious song, and I sing it over and over when I do my prayer walks, and I bask in his love for me, and that just increases the contentment that's in my heart. It makes a substantial frame for my soul, and it brings gracious quietness to my spirit. When I see him as a wise and loving father, it's so much easier to submit to him and delight in the tasks that he gives for me to do, and even in the condition which we find ourselves, or I find myself right now. It makes life sweet and sweeter as the days go by. So as a good father, God is always watching over us. He's always concerned about the things that concern us. He's willing to hear our cries and to offer not just sympathy. He doesn't just feel sorry for us, but he gives a real loving concern and involvement into our lives. And he knows us through and through, doesn't he? And he will never place us in a position outside of his care. So today, is your heart content? Is your life framed by security and confidence and rest in him? Are beautiful things flowing from your heart and from your mouth to those people around you? Or are you struggling with the restraints, fearful of the future and looking for any way out? Here's what I'm finding. I'm safe in the arms of Jesus, and so are you. What better place could we be? And from that frame of knowing that he is mine and I am his, I can settle back into my cell and rest. I can content myself with the situation that's around me and allow the beauty of Jesus to flow through me, to be the stance of my heart in every condition. Let's hear that definition one more time. Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. Keep calm and carry on.